What's up, guys? Welcome back. We got a great episode today. It's going to be heavy on the NFL. We got Deshaun Watson. What's been going on? I know we've talked about it before, but just more things start popping up. What is happening with the Houston Texans as an organization now, and why are they being targeted in these lawsuits? We'll cover that. We'll get into a cool little segment, something that I had planned. I'm looking at every NFL team. If you're a fan of a team that didn't make the playoffs last year, this is where you want to be, because I'm going to go over each team, give them the over-under on their record from last season, and tell you if I think your team will make the playoffs this year or if there's still a whole lot of work to do. This is episode 62 of the Sicko Sports podcast. Thank you guys for being here. As always, let's get straight into it. All right, first order of business. I've talked about this before. I think this is probably the third episode now. Luckily not in a row, but this is the third episode now we're getting into the Deshaun Watson situation. I know you might be tired of hearing it. Everything's covering Deshaun Watson, but it's the big news. It's what's going on in the NFL today. It's the biggest news. Once the season kicks off and if there's a suspension delivered, you probably won't even care anymore. But it's right now. This is the news. This is the stuff going on. Obviously, a few episodes ago, we talked about the settlement of the 20 of the 24 cases that were out against Deshaun Watson. We know he settled those cases. We know that legal actions from at least 20 cases aren't going to happen. He's not going to see any more legal actions happening from those 20 cases, at least. 4 still open. There's a few more things that may be popping up. But we got into the Houston Texans. As of a few days ago, the Houston Texans are now being the focal point of some more lawsuits. And you might be asking yourself, why the Houston Texans? This is from a statement that I got off of ESPN.com. The statement was, today we filed the first case of what will likely be many against the Houston Texans related to Deshaun Watson's behavior. Suffice it to say, the overwhelming evidence collected indicating that the Houston Texans enabled Watson's behavior is incredibly damaging, said Tony Busby. Tony Busby is the lawyer of the women that came out and accused Deshaun Watson of these crimes, of these sexual allegations. Not too specific on exactly what happened in each scenario, but there were a lot of allegations for Deshaun Watson, and he was a lawyer representing these women. And that's what he had to say. We believe the Texans knew or most certainly should have known of Watson's conduct. Beyond that, we believe the filing speaks for itself. So you might be asking yourself, what do the Houston Texans have? So what was happening was Deshaun Watson was going onto Instagram, finding these girls, many of them underqualified. Some of them were barely starting to get their license, hadn't finished school, weren't licensed massage therapists, weren't there yet. So the big question at hand is, well, wouldn't the team have that in place? Don't they have physical therapists that are paid by the team to take care of the face of the franchise and Deshaun Watson? The answer is yes. They did have that. They had that all along. But Deshaun Watson was doing this thing. So if you're wondering, were the Houston Texans setting these up? Were they the ones setting up the meetings between Deshaun Watson and these women? No. Deshaun Watson was doing it through DMs, through Instagram. But, however, if you're wondering, so how does the Texans get involved, right? How did the Texans become a focal point of a lawsuit if they may not have known anything? Well, this is where it gets interesting. This is from, I believe, CBS Sports, another statement that they have. Despite this behavior, and after yet another woman questioned Watson's behavior and threatened to expose Watson on the internet, the Houston Texans organization, rather than investigate and address Watson's disturbing behavior, instead provided Watson with an NDA to protect himself going forward from the random women he was finding on Instagram. Watson used the NDA for multiple massage sessions from random women he found on Instagram, telling the women that in order to get paid, she needed to sign the Texans NDA. NDA being a non-disclosure agreement. That's where the Houston Texans might find themselves into some trouble. This was a statement from somebody who worked at a massage session at a massage therapy place. They had a lot of massagers go there. This person also claimed that he knew of some of the employees that were actually involved in sexual acts. Some of them were not the women that came out and accused Deshaun Watson publicly or filed any lawsuits against him, that these were women that had spoken freely amongst each other about the fact that they did engage in sexual conduct with Deshaun Watson in their own private times. But this is where it gets dicey for the Houston Texans. So according to these people, instead of the Houston Texans saying, hey, Deshaun, let's talk to you. What's going on? Why are we not using in-house facilities? Why are we not using the massage therapists that we got? If what you're looking for are massages, which you say that that's all you're looking for, then we have that in place. You can come here. You don't got to pay your own money. You don't have to do any of these things, and we'll take care of you. What the Houston Texans did instead was say, hey, whatever you're doing, make sure they sign an NDA. Make sure that they can't speak about it publicly after whatever happens. And that's where the Houston Texans can find themselves in trouble. And that's where the lawsuits are coming in, saying that they were, in fact, enabling Deshaun Watson instead of taking the actions that most people would see as the necessary actions and the right actions, which are, what's going on? Why are you doing this? Is everything kosher? Do we have to get involved? Do we need to put a stop to this? Like, we can't let you go through with these things because they are shady. And, of course, I've sat here and said time and time again, I would not be ready to throw Deshaun Watson under the bus. I'm not ready to say that I know Deshaun Watson, nor will I ever be able to say that without a shadow of a doubt Deshaun Watson has done something illegal. Do I personally feel that Deshaun Watson was not interested in just a massage from these women? Yes, I do really feel like he was interested in more. If not, why would he? Guys, 66 people. These were 66 women that he used to get massages from between the years 2019 to 2021. 66 different therapy sessions. That's wild. I can't understand why that would be done outside of the Texans facility, why that would be done outside of the Houston Texans professional physical therapist. The only thing I could think of is, yeah, that's what he was trying to do. Now, to give my personal opinion, no facts here, right? Just read you all the facts, read you all the statements. To go into what I think, without any fact behind it, just what I feel, is that Deshaun Watson, with his girlfriend currently, has been with her for a while. Maybe he wanted to cheat, couldn't do it in a public forum. But if I can do this, and especially if I have an NDA behind me, I can do it freely. Now, does that mean that he was committing crimes? We don't know, right? Because there's the difference. You can judge him and say, hey, he's not a good person if that's what he was doing. Fair enough. Fair enough. But to say that he's a criminal, those aren't criminal behaviors. Unfortunately, those aren't criminal behaviors. It might sound criminal, but it's not criminal. Him going out of his way to try to cheat on his girlfriend or trying to get these girls, hey, we start off with a massage. Maybe I try to flirt with them a little bit, catch the vibe. Some of them I end up sleeping with. I end up doing this or that with. And then some of them, they're not into it. They're not giving me the vibe. So it is what it is. Again, if that's shady, if that changes your opinion on Deshaun Watson as a person, that's fair. You have all the right to feel that way. But that is not criminal. Now, if he's exposing himself to them when they didn't ask for it, now we're looking at something criminal. If he's touching them inappropriately and getting no consent from them, now we're looking at something criminal. So we're never going to know that. Those lines, that line between someone who's just kind of a horny dude and a kind of a pig or whatever you want to call him, and the line of a criminal, that line is a thin one. We're never going to know, especially with these settlements. We'll never know where that line was, how far he came to it, did he cross it? We'll never know that. Only Deshaun Watson and those women involved will ever know the truth behind that. Now, Watson's hearing started yesterday, started on Tuesday. His hearing, obviously, for the NFL. NFL still has to make a ruling. There's a judge that's going to make a ruling. The NFL is going to seek a punishment a judge is going to be able to give that punishment out, say what it is, but ultimately it lands back on Roger Goodell. So whatever that judge says, it lands on Roger Goodell, and then he will either say, yes, let's go ahead and give that, or he can also give less, which whatever the ruling is, whatever the discipline is that the NFL is looking for, again, that's compromised or that's composed of the 32 owners. So Roger Goodell's never going to disagree with that. Whatever they push, whatever the judge gives to him, he's probably going to sign off on and say, yeah, that's the punishment we're going for. They are going, it seems like the NFL, at least at this point, is seeking a full year suspension, where Deshaun Watson, his lawyer, and the NFL Players Association, the NFLPA, are seeking as little as 0. Someone's got to give. Is he going to get a full year? Is he going to get 4 games? Is he going to get 0 games? Is he going to get, we don't know where that lies. But interesting enough, there is somebody that actually might be playing a factor into this hearing, and that is Dan Snyder, the owner of the Washington Commanders. Dan Snyder, I will definitely be going deep dive probably next week or at some point that we get more news and more information to see what's happening with Dan Snyder. But Daniel Snyder, in a heap of allegations, so many accusations against him, from sexual misconduct to I mean, it goes on and on and on with Dan Snyder in the front office of the Washington Commanders. But interesting enough, his name did pop up in the research I was doing, that he was going to be used as an example to defend Deshaun Watson. So here he began on Tuesday. He's going to play a factor in Watson's defense, as one of their main points is a lack of disciplinary action taken against him, when in fact owners are supposed to be held to a higher standard according to the personal conduct policy of the NFL. So it's basically one of those situations where it's 2 kids in class. One of them gets in trouble for something and he goes, hey, how come he didn't get in trouble for that? That's basically what the NFLPA is going to be looking at. That's basically what Deshaun Watson and his team are going to be looking at is, hey, if I'm going to face NFL consequences, if I'm going to face consequences that are passed down from the league itself, not legal actions, but from the league, you have an owner that's being accused of a lot of stuff, that has a lot of things going on, and he's not facing any ramifications for those allegations. He's not facing the same disciplinary actions that I am, when in fact our conduct policy states that owners should be held to a higher standard than players. How come we're not seeing that? And we know why they're not. We know exactly why they're not. It's the same kind of conduct policy that exists in the government, right? As much as presidents and everybody else in the government, senators and everybody, governors, all of them should be held to higher standards than any citizen, but they're not, right? They can commit a whole bunch of things that an average citizen can never do and get away with, even though they're supposed to be held to a higher standard than that. It's just what happens when you have the power, and money behind everything. You're not going to face the same consequences Deshaun Watson's going to face, or at least not as quickly. He's going to see a whole lot of stuff, and that's where we're at with Deshaun Watson. We're still going to stick with this story. We're still going to see how it plays out, what the hearing is, and we'll definitely have him be mentioned again in another future episode. Hopefully not too many. Hopefully this gets wrapped up pretty soon, and we can move on from the Deshaun Watson situation. We can put it past us, whether he's suspended for a year, whether he's not. I don't know. I don't know what the right punishment is for Deshaun Watson, because, again, I'll never know, guys. Well, you'll never know. You can judge him. That's fine. That's fair. I can't tell you who to like, who to dislike, what judgment to have on somebody. But in terms of the truth, we will never get that, especially with the settlements. And remember, even without the settlements, it got thrown out twice because of the lack of evidence. So it's always going to be he said, she said in this situation, and we never know exactly what happened. We'll never know. Sources for all of these, none of this was just made up by me. This came from ESPN, Pro Football Talk, Cleveland.com, CBS Sports, and the Wall Street Journal. That information, all the information that I gave to you guys, was found in all of these sites here. So I had to do a little bit of digging. I was really interested in finding out, like, what exactly is going on. What exactly is his stance? What exactly are the Houston Texans being sued for? Where did they play a role into it? So hopefully that information helps you guys out if you're still a little lost and confused on what exactly is going on, and especially with the new news of the Houston Texans themselves. All right. Very interesting thing that I want to get into. It's something that I've been trying to do for a little while, but the UFC has been so damn good. MMA has been so good. The playoffs were happening. The finals were happening for the NBA. So I pushed this off for a little bit, but I wanted to take a dive into teams that may be swept under the rug. If you're a fan of a team that didn't make the playoffs last year, maybe you're feeling like you're flying under the radar. Maybe you're frustrated. Maybe you're disappointed. Maybe you feel like people are sleeping on your team or not giving them the credit, and we get that, right? National media, all of them, they're all going to talk about the same stuff. They're all going to talk about the Cowboys. Listen, I'm wearing a Dallas Cowboys sweater. I got a DeMarcus Ware jersey behind me. I'm a diehard Dallas Cowboys fan. I haven't talked about the Dallas Cowboys in... I honestly can't even tell you when the last episode is that I mentioned the Dallas Cowboys. I don't care. I'm talking about whatever I want to talk about. Sometimes I will talk about the Cowboys. Sometimes I won't. National media, unfortunately, all they talk about is the Cowboys. They'll talk about Tom Brady. They'll talk about the Rams. They'll talk about whatever team is in the spotlight in the top. Well, this is an episode for you. This right here is a spot for you. I wanted to look at the teams that didn't make the playoffs last year. I wanted to go over their record and think about those teams. Really dive into the offseason moves, draft picks, culture, head coaching changes. Which teams, what are they going to look like this season? For all of those teams that missed the playoffs last year, what are they going to look like coming in to 2022-2023 season? And if they will be better or worse than the record they previously had. So we're going to get into it. We're going to start off with the AFC. First team I'm going to look at is the Indianapolis Colts. They were 9-8 last season, right outside the playoffs. If you remember that epic collapse, it looked like the Colts had the playoff berth in the bag. They had to win, I think, one of their last 3 games of the season, ended up losing. Or they had to win 2 of their last 3 games, somewhere around there. They lost 2 of the 3, one of them being the Jacksonville Jaguars. It was a very tough ending to what it seemed like a pretty good season for the Indianapolis Colts, and then just that tough ending to keep them just outside the playoffs. Carson Wentz, obvious, he's departed. He's no longer on the Colts. In comes Matt Ryan, a veteran, a guy who definitely isn't in his prime, kind of on the tail end of his career. Very similar to the Phillip Rivers situation, where it seems like that's the Colts' route. That's what the Colts are going to do, is bring in a veteran quarterback and see what, if any, improvements can be made on the offensive side of the ball. For Matt Ryan's situation, listen, Carson Wentz, despite the record, despite the 9-8, despite the fact that I can find games and find moments of the season where Carson Wentz actually did have a good impact. He was good in moments and good in some games. Even if I can pull that up, at the end of the day, overall for the season, I felt like Carson Wentz he didn't give the improvements that I thought he might. If you go back to preseason of last year, I talked about Carson Wentz and how I thought that he can have a big impact, that maybe he can be better than Phillip Rivers was and give the Colts a little bit more offensively, that maybe the change of scenery, maybe getting back into a system with Frank Wright, maybe that's going to bring him back, bring out a little bit of that old Carson Wentz, that early MVP vote Carson Wentz. It didn't really happen. He had his flashes, but struggled throughout the season. Anytime fans are wearing hats and wearing shirts that say run the ball, anytime they're chanting run the ball, it's because the quarterback didn't do so great, right? I don't care who the running back is with the Kansas City Chiefs. They're not chanting run the ball. When they got Patrick Mahomes out there, they're not chanting run the ball. I don't care if the Packers have Aaron Jones and Dillon and A.J. Dillon and all these boys. I don't care what their backfield looks like. And they're not going to just pound the ball. They have Aaron Rodgers. So when you have a team that is saying run the ball, yes, I get it. Jonathan Taylor, amazing. He's going to be back this year. We'll see if he has a little bit of a slump, a little bit of a down year. But whenever you have a team chanting run the damn ball, it's because your quarterback isn't doing so hot. I think Matt Ryan is going to give him a little bit more. I really do. Even looking back and watching Matt Ryan from the Atlanta Falcons, the team was terrible, but Matt Ryan still looked good in spots, man. He still looked really good. He could still sling the ball. He's been around for a very long time. The Colts system does not ask too much. Frank Reich's system doesn't ask for too much from their quarterback. He asks for smart play, get the ball out when we need to get the ball out, and just play through the system. You don't have to do too much. I mean, it's a system that won a Super Bowl with Nick Foles. So that tells you no shot at Nick Foles, but it just tells you how that system is. Yannick Ngakoue and Stephon Gilmore both joined the team, beefing up that defense, especially that secondary with Stephon Gilmore. That secondary was a little bit of an issue for the Colts. Still kind of is, but with a veteran, Stephon Gilmore, if he still has it, my personal favorite defensive back in the NFL, may be on the downside of his career, but if he still has it a little bit, that's two big impacts that they can have. Yannick Ngakoue, I think this is his 4th or 5th team now in the NFL, a guy who has so much raw potential coming out, so much raw talent, hasn't quite found a home, but he can just add another rotational guy off the edge, and the Colts defense can get a lot better. So 9-8 last year. I'm going to say 10-7 this year. I'm giving them the over on their record. I think that they will make the playoffs that come in this year. I think Frank Reich gets back into the playoffs with this team. The Miami Dolphins, we know what's going on with them. They were 9-8 last year. Deep at the running back position, Chase Edmonds, Raheem Mostert, Sony Michel got picked up. A lot of running backs is going to be running back by committee for the Miami Dolphins. Some of those guys have some injury issues, Raheem Mostert in particular. But deep at the running back, no real one primary featured guy, but very deep there. We know what's up with Tyreek Hill. We know he's coming over, and that's the big question, right? Tyreek Hill, what does he look like when he doesn't have the strongest arm in the NFL? What does he look like when he doesn't have a guy that can change all of the... What's up, Steele? What's up, man? Hey, shout out my guy. But what does Tyreek Hill look like when he doesn't have somebody that can buy the time and let him scatter around, get behind the secondary, take off downfield, break off his routes, and then bomb the ball? What does he look like when he doesn't have that arm? Because unfortunately, Tua does not. If anybody thinks Tua has the same arm, and I know Tyreek Hill said he did, what else is he supposed to say? Is he supposed to say, oh yeah, this guy's way worse than Patrick Mahomes? Like, no, he's going to back up his guy. Tyreek Hill said he has the same arm, but anybody that looks at them understands Tua doesn't have that type of arm. He doesn't have that type of cannon. But a smart quarterback. With the receiving core that he has, the pieces that Tua has, this is the question, right? This is going to be a season, which kind of sucks for Tua. He hasn't been in the league long, right? He's still on his rookie contract, but this is a year that's going to show, like, hey, is Tua really going to be that guy or not? This is a year where we're going to be able to see that from Tua Tagovailoa with the weapons that he has, including Terron Armstead, obviously not a skill player, left tackle. Interesting that you would sign a big-time left tackle when you have a left-handed quarterback. I would assume that it would be the blind side, but regardless, left tackle, right tackle, doesn't matter. Terron Armstead is really that dude. He's one of the best offensive linemen, one of the best left tackles in the game, and that's huge improvement for that offensive line. He's going to add a much needed help across the O-line for them. Melvin Ingram on that team as well, so a couple veteran guys coming over. For the Miami Dolphins, 9-8 last year is what I said. I'm going to keep them at 9-8. I don't think they improve too much. I can see them getting double-digit wins, but it's just such a big question mark. And here's the thing. They have a question mark in Tua, but Tyreek has also been a little bit of a question mark. I'll never disagree with Tyreek Hill's numbers and what he's done. Hey, if you get the numbers, you get the numbers, man. If you have the numbers to back it up, I can't say you're this, that, or the other. People that say, oh, Tyreek Hill isn't that good. It's like, well, you can't get those kind of numbers in the NFL if you're not that good. Now, is Tyreek Hill capable of doing that with anybody? Probably not. Yeah, Patrick Mahomes has a big contribution for that. You know, when you have a quarterback that not only has the skill set of Patrick Mahomes, but when you have a team that throws the ball 40-plus times a game, you're going to get more opportunities. So what does it look like with Tua? At the end of the day, yeah, he's a different type of receiver. He's different than DeAndre Hopkins. He's different than Stephon Diggs or one of these guys who are great route runners, Cooper Kupp, guys that you can look at with Tua and go, oh, okay, I think they can really improve. I think they could really improve Tua. Tyreek Hill is more of like a cheat code. If you have the ability to unlock that code, if you have the buttons, right? If you have the combination of the code, he'll unlock it and he'll unleash it and he'll break the damn game. But you have to have the skill set. I don't know if Tua has the skill set, but we'll say, 9-8. I'm gonna keep them what they were. That could be good enough to make the playoffs. The fact that they're in the AFC and the AFC is looking like it's beefing up, I'm gonna say they missed the playoffs this year as well with another 9-8 record. Moving on, speaking of teams that are beefing up, the Chargers. Oh my goodness, right? If we're looking at early favorites, I don't know where they lie. Maybe I'll add it for you guys here, where they are in terms of early odds to win a Super Bowl, but they got to be towards the top. They have to be towards the top. Notable acquisitions in the offseason: Khalil Mack, Cal Van Noy, J.C. Jackson, Gerald Everett. Obviously, the big one being Khalil Mack. Him, opposite side of Joey Bosa. It's going to be scary. Cal Van Noy is going to be in there as a rotational player, veteran. If you remember him, his days with the Patriots, when he was with the Dolphins, he has a really solid season. And J.C. Jackson, former Patriot, that came over, a really good corner for them. So the defense is beefing up like crazy for the Chargers. And then Justin Herbert, if he just keeps adding on, if he just kind of keeps looking as what he's looking like, he's kind of taking that. For when I look at Justin Herbert, it kind of reminds me of the last couple years for Josh Allen. I'm not going to compare it to Josh Allen's career thus far, because Josh Allen's first couple years in the league, if you remember, people were questioning whether Josh Allen was going to be this guy, if he can get to this level. They were kind of talking about him the way I'm talking about Tua, which is, well, we're going to have to see. This is kind of a make or break. If he can't improve, we don't see something from him, we could just move on, and then all of a sudden, boom, Josh Allen has the best season, tears it up, and then comes back the next year even better. Justin Herbert's kind of looking on that path where, what is it that he can't do on the football field? Just big, physical, fast, extend the pocket, laser beam of an arm. The sky's the limit for Justin Herbert. And now with the pieces that they have, with the improvements on defense, the biggest change to that defense is having a healthy Derwin James. Derwin James, and that's a big question, right? Derwin James seems like he's kind of always hurt, but he's still on the team and he still plays that factor, and he's still somebody that you have to look at and go, if Derwin James is healthy, the sky's the limit for this defense. Khalil Mack, Joey Bosa, J.C. Jackson, Derwin James, it's nuts. It's nuts. They have to be one of the odds-on favorite to win it this year. I have them 9-8 was a record last season. Missed the playoffs with a 9-8 record. I'm gonna have them 11-6. That is gonna be good enough to make the playoffs, I believe. Will it be good enough to win the division? That's the interesting part. I don't know. I'm not sure. The reason I don't have them higher, if you go 11-6 is too low, how are you going to say that they're a Super Bowl contender team and should be the odds-on favorite, but you have them at 11-6? Well, because of that division, and we'll get into a couple more teams from the division, but because that division is so stacked, I can't be confident in giving them 14, 15 wins. I can see it, though. I can see it, but kind of playing it safe a little bit. 11-6, 12-5, right around that area, which again, in my opinion, still good enough to make the playoffs, might be good enough to win the division. Moving on to a team that we kind of spoke about a little bit, at least we spoke about the biggest concern for them, is the Cleveland Browns. Obviously, have no idea what's going to happen with Deshaun Watson. It seems very unlikely that he's going to be the starting quarterback week 1. Very unlikely. Is he the starting quarterback week 4? Is he the starting quarterback week 8? Does he play at all this year? All of that is still an unknown. So because of that, I can't give an expectation on the Cleveland Browns this year. Even with Baker Mayfield, even if I were to say, okay, let's take Deshaun Watson out of the equation, and let's just say that he's going to be gone for the entire season, I can't just say, insert Baker Mayfield. They have tarnished his name enough. The relationship between the Cleveland Browns and Baker Mayfield is so fractured that even Baker had alluded to it. Obviously, they're going to have to ask Baker with all these things happening with Deshaun Watson. They have to ask Baker Mayfield, hey, what if you need a start? What if they're like, well, we're not going to have Watson. Let's go with Baker for the year. If they can't trade you, if they can't find a trading partner, that's going to be their best route. That's going to be their best decision to make. What does Baker feel about it? And Baker said flat out, I'm not opposed to it. He's open to the idea, but he said they're going to have to make that. They're going to have to reach out. They're going to have to do their part. They're going to have to initiate the conversations in repairing the fractured relationship between him and the organization. And he said, I'm not thinking about playing for the Cleveland Browns. And thinking Baker's mind, he's like, get me the F out of here. Get me somewhere else. I do not want to be on this team, and I don't blame him. When you look at Baker Mayfield and the way they treated him, now I'm not saying Baker had a great season by any means, but there's a good chance that that shoulder really affected. I mean, guys, we saw, how does that shoulder not affect you? Did Baker have a bad season? Yeah, of course he had a bad season, but he also had a pretty good season the year before. And the way they treated him in the organization, they made it very, very clear that they do not think he's good enough to get them where they want to go. And not only did they make it clear, they made it clear to the entire league that Baker is not good enough to get you where you want to go. It lowered his value. How do you forgive a team that has basically cost you millions, or at least you feel that way, whether it's justified or not, whether we believe it or not? If that's the way Baker feels, how can we expect him to put his best foot forward and say, you know what, I don't care. Let's do it. I'm here. I'm going to try to take this team to the Super Bowl and then get money somewhere else or get traded after that. So many questions open for the Cleveland Browns. I mean, there's a good chance that Jacoby Brissett is the starter of this team. There's a good chance that Jacoby Brissett stays with the team the whole year. Like, there's a chance that that's their quarterback for the entire season. And, that would be tough for them. That would be really, really tough for them. Especially, let's just say Jacoby Brissett starts, right? Let's say Baker gets traded. They're not getting back a whole bunch for Baker. Like I said, they've made it very clear that his value is nowhere near Deshaun Watson's value. They made that very clear. Some will say Baker Mayfield made that clear. Regardless, they're not getting back much. They'll get back something for sure, but not too much. This is a team that gave up a first-round pick this year, a first and third next year, and 2 fourths the year after that. So it's a team that gave up all of that to get Deshaun Watson. Deshaun Watson can't play, and Baker gets traded. They're not getting much of that stuff that they gave up. They're not getting much of that back for Baker Mayfield. Now, how funny would it be if Jacoby Brissett ends up being the starter for the entire season? They have a bad season, and then that makes their first-round draft pick that much better for another team. It could be a situation where the Houston Texans end up having a better record than the Browns and still get a better draft pick thanks to the Cleveland Browns. It would be a very Cleveland Browns scenario, wouldn't it? Wouldn't it be such a Browns thing? They do have some other acquisitions. I mean, David Njoku, Jadeveon Clowney coming back. That's big for the team. Those are two guys that obviously wanted to be there, wanted to stay. They were intrigued at the Deshaun Watson. They felt like all systems were go. Jarvis Landry obviously gone, but replaced with Amari Cooper. They got Amari Cooper for pennies on the dollar. I mean, they got him for nothing from the Dallas Cowboys. And it looked like this was going to be one of those teams. It looked like, hey, if Deshaun's what he was, that MVP candidate from a few years ago when he was playing with Amari Cooper, with these boys, and the defense is still back. They still got Myles Garrett and all these all systems go. Because of that, I cannot give them an over-under. I can't give them a prediction for this season. 8-9 last year. Who knows, man? It could go from 4 wins to 14 wins. I got no clue. It all depends. It would be easier if it all depended on just Deshaun Watson, but it doesn't. It all depends on Deshaun Watson, and it depends on what's going to happen with Baker Mayfield. So I really can't give an expectation. I really can't give a prediction for the Browns season. So we're going to leave it at that. We'll see. I'll probably circle back to it when the hearing's over and we know what's going on, and then we got to know what's going on with Baker. Then I'll be able to give you guys a prediction. But as of right now, like I said, 4-13, 12-5. Pick a number between there. I have no clue. Moving on, staying in the AFC, obviously, Baltimore Ravens. Coming up, Lamar Jackson going to be back. That's obviously the biggest question mark for the Baltimore Ravens. Lamar Jackson being back. Still talking about Deshaun Watson. Lamar Jackson being back. How healthy is he? Can he stay healthy? More importantly, for the entirety of the season and how much better is this team with Lamar Jackson. It's a well-coached team, guys. I can never count out the Baltimore Ravens the same way I count out the Pittsburgh Steelers. Mike Tomlin, to me, I can't rule him out. I don't care what he's got going on. I don't care what that roster looks like in Pittsburgh. I can't really rule him out. And the same thing goes for John Harbaugh. Whatever the roster looks like, whatever pieces they have, I just can't rule them out. He's just such a damn good coach. And if Lamar Jackson's there, say what you want. He doesn't have this ability. He can't throw. He doesn't possess what you need a quarterback in today's league to possess. Say what you want about it, but when he's there, they're a playoff team. When he's healthy, they're a playoff team. And if you're in the playoffs, anything can happen. And they're still a really good team. A couple guys that they got in the draft that I thought, to me, the Baltimore Ravens won the draft this year, just because of the fact that, they didn't have a top pick. Well, they get Kyle Hamilton, but the position that they got him, what everyone talking about him being a top 3 pick possibly at one point, getting him makes a huge difference. And then they got Tyler Linderbaum, who I really wanted the Dallas Cowboys to get. Great center, but he's coming in. Kyle Hamilton, Tyler Linderbaum, those guys are going to be impact players immediately. Those guys can be day one starters for this team. They signed Kyle Fuller, signed Marcus Williams, another stud safety from the Saints, and then signed Michael Pierce as well as that. So when you look at the Ravens, Michael Pierce obviously was on the team. Now he's back. He spent a little bit of time with the Vikings. Now he's back with the Ravens, but he was a beast with the Ravens. He's all pro, big-time stud, just exactly what you need on that team. Your zero gap, your nose tackle to just eat up blockers, just eat up gaps, be an immovable force. That's exactly what Michael Pierce has been, and I'm sure they're glad they got that back. And then, like I said, their secondary, my goodness, Kyle Hamilton, if he's a bit of what his potential is coming into the draft, him and Marcus Williams with the addition of Kyle Fuller, which Kyle Fuller looks like his best days were beyond him, but still a good corner, which is what they need. So because of that, I'm going to say the Baltimore Ravens, 8-9 last year. I'm going to say they hit the over. 10-7 this year is where I put the Baltimore Ravens. I think Lamar Jackson is good enough to win 2 more games than they had last year, if he stays healthy. That's a big question mark, but all I can do is assume that he's going to stay healthy, and that's why I say 10-7. The Denver Broncos, going on to another quarterback and health. Russell Wilson, obviously the huge signing, probably the biggest signing of the offseason is Russell Wilson to the Denver Broncos. He's going to be, listen, say what you want about Russell Wilson. I see people time and time again try to hate on Russell Wilson for whatever reason. This is a multiple Super Bowl winner. There's no way you can watch a healthy Russell Wilson and say that the guy is not a top 10 quarterback at the least. Even if you make a case for him being in the top 5, it'd be hard for me to disagree with you. Top 10, if you don't have him in your top 10, you are on something. Like, Russell Wilson is still that guy. And then he goes into a team that has a great receiving core, probably a deeper receiving core than he had in Seattle at any point in his career. Very similar to like a Peyton Manning when Peyton Manning was, well, I can't say that about Peyton. Reggie Wayne was pretty damn good, but similar in the case that he goes into a team that has kind of that underrated. When Peyton Manning went to the Broncos, he kind of had an underrated core there with him. And the same thing happens with Russell Wilson. Russell Wilson leaves and you go, okay, maybe they don't have somebody as good as DK Metcalf. And yeah, Tyler Lockett was really good. But in terms of depth, you got Jerry Jeudy. You're looking at Cortland Sutton, KJ Hamler, Tim Patrick. They are deep in that receiving core. And Russell Wilson is going to make them look better. I truly think Russell Wilson can have one of those guys, if not a couple of them, looking like true studs and get them what they want, which is that bag. Get them out of their rookie contract, especially for somebody like Jerry Jeudy. Get them out of that rookie contract and get him a big, big payday. He's probably looking at Russell Wilson with dollar signs in his eyes. But Russell Wilson obviously is going to take that team, especially his preparation. We already saw videos of him and Peyton Manning doing film studies together, looking over things, Peyton picking his brain, him picking Peyton's brain. It's going to be good. It's going to be good. Denver Broncos, 7-10 last year. 11-6 this year at the minimum. I give the Broncos, obviously, I'm giving the Denver Broncos the over with Russell Wilson's arrival there. And I think, personally, good enough to make the playoffs. So in the AFC already, 1, 2, 3 teams now, 4 teams if you include the Colts that I say will make the playoffs. Which 4 teams won't make the playoffs? We'll have to get into that another day. But maybe I'm buying off more than I can chew. But I'm already saying 4 teams, maybe 3. Maybe the Colts aren't good enough to get in at 10-7. But at least 3 teams that I have here that are going to make the playoffs, in my opinion. Denver Broncos being one of them. And then there's some teams, unfortunately, we get into the last 3 teams with 3 worst records in the AFC last season. The New York Jets being one of them. Lovie Smith, love him to death. Love Lovie Smith, but he has such a giant culture change to make. We're building from ground zero. It seemed like ground zero was last year, and then they get rid of their head coach. They bring in Lovie Smith. Has to keep building on that culture change. Who in the world is going to be his quarterback? It seems like they're pretty cool with Davis Mills rocking it for this year. It might be a throwaway season for the Texans. This might be a year where they're looking at it going, all right, so maybe Davis Mills ends up being way better than we think. Maybe Davis Mills takes these giant leaps and ends up being a stud. Or maybe he's terrible and we get the first overall pick next year. We'll see what happens. Houston Texans, 4-13 last year. We're going to say 3-14 this year. Like, when I look at this team, I just don't know where they go, and it looks as if the AFC has picked it up a little bit more. It looks like the AFC is even that much tougher than they were last year. So if you're a team that hasn't made any moves, if you're a team whose roster just doesn't look like they're that, and how much what does a locker room really look like? How deeply impacted was it by the departures of DeAndre Hopkins, by the departure of Deshaun Watson now, from firing 2 coaches in the last couple years? What do they look like? How determined? What is the mood? What is the thought process? I can't imagine that those guys are going into the room with a legitimate thought of, we're going to make the playoffs this year. We're going to shock the world and make the playoffs. You know, if you have a team that's not bought in, how in the world are you going to change that? I just can't imagine a way that the Houston Texans get to 6-7 wins even. So 4 wins last season, 3 wins this season for the Houston Texans. And then lastly, the Jacksonville Jaguars. Or I'm sorry, let's do the New York Jets. I've skipped over them, 4-13 last year. I love what Joe Douglas is doing. He's GM for the New York Jets. I think he's making all the right moves, made all the right draft picks. I think he's doing exactly what you need to do in the organization. They didn't go crazy in the offseason. They didn't start handing out bags left and right where you put yourself in that situation. It's very similar to like what the Brooklyn Nets did a while back. Sorry to have to reference NBA when we're talking about the NFL right now. But a while back, I remember the Nets, not the current Nets, not Kevin Durant and them. I'm saying when the Nets went into new ownership a while back, when they got Joe Johnson, Darren Williams, all these guys, Brooke Lopez was still there, and they were handing out bags, just bags, to these veteran guys. And then it was very clear that all of them had passed their prime, and it did not go their way. And they ended up basically wasting another 5-6 years trying to rebuild the mistakes, trying to fix the mistakes that they made. I like the fact that Joe Douglas isn't doing that. He's not coming in saying, okay, let's just load up on guys. He's like, hey, Zach Wilson's going to take some time to get there. Let's build the foundation. Let's stay young. Let's keep building from within. Let's build from ground up. And eventually, if Zach Wilson is that guy, then eventually we can entice more free agents to come over here and play with us, especially being in New York, which Zach Wilson is the biggest concern, right? That's the biggest question mark. I wouldn't say concern, but for him, what kind of improvements do we see this year? I think he improved last year. If you looked at him from, first few games in the season, obviously he had to deal with some injuries. He had an injury that kept him sidelined for a little while, which kind of sucks. You hope that doesn't slow down his progress too much. But the end of the season, the last few games that he played, definitely looked better than the first few. I mean, the first few were rough. The first few games of the season were rough, but they're supposed to be, man. If they're not rough, then why is it the NFL? If you can come in, week 2, week 3 and just dominate. The expectation on you is going to be Super Bowl very soon. So, Zach Wilson, look for the improvements this year. How much better does he get? Does he start turning doubters into believers? That's what you want. You're not looking for X amount of games in the win column. You're not looking for X amount of stats for Zach Wilson. You're just looking for the improvement. You're just looking for something that he does this year that takes a little more doubters out, that turns a little more doubters into believers, where you go, Zach Wilson might be the guy moving forward. They might have found themselves a franchise quarterback. And I believe in Zach Wilson, man. When I look at him, and this is someone that I didn't believe in at all. This is someone who I was very harsh coming into the NFL draft, and I could have jumped all over him, and I could look up the stats, and I can pull up highlights, especially from the first quarter of the season, and show you all the things and say, look, I told you I was right. But I saw improvements at the end of the year where I went, oh, shit. We've never questioned the talent. We questioned the toughness, mentally and physically. So we'll see how many improvements he made on that. Like I said, the draft picks, Sauce Gardner, corner, amazing. I've had him as the number 1 corner in the draft by far. Garrett Wilson, wide receiver at Ohio State, stud, another guy that they need, another guy that can be a deep threat. They do have a decent receiving core, some kind of under the radar guys, but Garrett Wilson, I think, has real potential to be a number 1 guy for them, which is still something that they need. And then Jermaine Johnson, great edge, coming off, the New York Jets defense always has to be focal point. New York, when they were good, like, you think about that defense. And then lastly, in the AFC, the Jacksonville Jaguars, Doug Peterson now taking over as head coach. Press Taylor, brother of head coach of the Cincinnati Bengals, Zach Taylor, he's the offensive coordinator for them. So when you look at him along with Doug Peterson, you would imagine that Trevor Lawrence is going to get all of the real help that he unfortunately didn't get. We know what happened with Urban Meyer. We know what kind of shitstorm that was. And I'm trying not to talk about Dallas Cowboys here for a second, but it is funny to me how so many people really, really wanted Urban Meyer in the Cowboys organization. I wanted him nowhere near it. That is exactly why. So it looks like Trevor Lawrence is going to get what he needs to improve. How much improvement? I don't know. 3 wins last year. I'd imagine that with the culture change that Doug Peterson's going to bring. Listen, Doug Peterson, you can say what you want about him in Philly, but, they still were able to get to a Super Bowl. He still won a Super Bowl with that team, and that's not easy to do in the NFL. I think that he's a breath of fresh air for Trevor Lawrence in particular. Press Taylor, just coming from Zach Taylor's system, it's going to be a little more modern-day friendly for Trevor Lawrence, who is a very modern-day quarterback. I think that's going to help him out a lot, and I'm going to say over for the Jacksonville Jaguars. 3-14 last year, 6-11 this year. I don't know if I gave the New York Jets the over and under, the prediction for the next year, but it's over. I'm going to give them 6 wins. They were 4-13 last year. I give them 6-11 this year, same as Jacksonville, 6-11. Obviously, not good enough to make the playoffs. Heading over to the NFC now. We're going to start with the New Orleans Saints. 9-8 last year. The biggest issue with the New Orleans Saints is the injury to Jameis Winston. I actually started to become a little bit of a believer last year with Jameis Winston. And here's my issue with the Saints this year. Was I starting to become a believer because I started feeling like Jameis Winston was making improvements or becoming a better quarterback now? Or is Sean Payton just that good? Is Sean Payton just good enough to make me a believer in Jameis Winston, in Mr. 30-30? Is Sean Payton just that good of a head coach? And if he is, well, he's not there anymore. And not only is he not there anymore, but the guy that I started to believe a little bit in Jameis Winston, is also injured. So that team, the issue on why I can't say that team's going to just completely plummet, when I go, well, they don't have a quarterback, and I say the head coach, a guy who was looked at as one of the best head coaches in the NFL, is gone. You look at the rest of that team, that's still a stud. That team is loaded with studs. Now they have Jarvis Landry added to the mix, Tyrann Mathieu added to the mix, Marcus May added to the mix. They got loads of talent. I mean, the talent on this team is insane when you look at the depth chart, when you look at the roster of the New Orleans Saints. Man, even if Jameis Winston's out for a while, they still have such good pieces around that the only reason I would say that they will have a worse season this year is because of Sean Payton. If Sean Payton was still there, I might say, hey, even without Jameis Winston, just the pieces that they were able to keep and the pieces that I just mentioned that they added, I might say they were going to win 10 games this season. But because of Sean Payton's departure and because Jameis Winston's injuries, I'm going to say 8-9. Again, that team is just so damn good. The talent on that team is insane. But 8-9, I think those two things are just a little too much to overcome. 8-9, and I would assume that 8-9 would not be good enough to make the playoffs. Speaking of teams that were 8-9 last year, were the Minnesota Vikings. For Minnesota, I always say, it comes down to the quarterback, comes down to this guy. It doesn't come down to Kirk. Kirk Cousins is exactly what we think Kirk Cousins is. If you still have any doubts that Kirk Cousins is, for some reason, it's hard for people to just realize whenever somebody's, top middle. Whenever there's a quarterback that's top middle, for some reason, people have a hard time with it. Too many people want to put him in the top 10. Too many people want to put him in the bottom 10. And he's top middle. He's top 15, somewhere between 10 and 15. Throw him in there. So we know what he's going to give us. So it's not depending on Kirk. We know what Kirk's going to do. We know his numbers are going to look good. We know he's going to make some big throws. We know he's going to make some big plays. But we know he's not going to be able to single-handedly take a team that's flawed and take them into the playoffs. He's not going to be able to take a team that has some issues, that has a lot of work to do, and cover up, right? He's not that level. He's not a Patrick Mahomes type of guy where, hey, even if we have some glaring holes and weaknesses in our team, I'm so good, I can cover that up and I can still get the job done. He's not that good. He's also not bad. They've got Zadarius Smith, obviously, coming to the Vikings. Zadarius Smith, former Baltimore Raven, former Green Bay Packer. Now he finds his way with the Minnesota Vikings. I wonder how much that defense changes with Zadarius Smith. He's not your kind of typical Mike Zimmer edge rusher, but with him not being there anymore, this could work out for him. He's still a monster of a guy. Harrison Phillips, also veteran, adding him inside to that defensive line. Minnesota Vikings 8-9 last year. I'm gonna give them 9-8 this year. It's kind of the same team. A little bit of a shakeup with the coaching staff, obviously, but like I said, we kind of know what they're going to give us. We know that they're going to be right there. We know they're going to be right in playoff contention. It's just, is 9 games enough to make it to the playoffs? Last year, they had a real opportunity, kind of similar to the Jaguars, where they had the chance. The fact that they let the Eagles creep up and get into the playoffs when they should have been the last team. They should have been the 7th team in the NFC to make the playoffs, and they just couldn't get it done, man. And I know everyone's listening to this like, yeah, Kirk Cousins, that's why. It's just hard for me to blame Kirk when I know what he's going to give me, and every time I know what he's going to give me, he gives me that. Like, he gives me exactly what I expect from him on a game-to-game basis. When I look at the entire season, I think of what Kirk is going to do, he does that. He doesn't raise the expectations for me, and he doesn't lower my expectations for him. He kind of hits on my expectations year after year. So I can't just keep blaming Kirk Cousins. Also, another team that I mentioned in the beginning of the podcast was the Washington Commanders, and obviously the Dan Snyder situation, all of that. But they do have a new quarterback. Carson Wentz was in the NFC East, obviously with the Eagles, back to the NFC East now with the Washington Commanders. I'm a believer in Carson Wentz. As I stated previously when talking about the Indianapolis Colts, no, I'm not a believer in Carson Wentz. However, do I think that he can give you more than Heineke? Yes. I do think that he's better than Tyler Heineke. How much better? I'm not sure. The biggest question for me isn't Carson Wentz, because I think Carson Wentz is going to give you a little more. That's going to be something, right? He's going to give you a little more than Heineke was. Heineke, for 2 years ago, we went, maybe he could be decent. Maybe. And then last year, we were able to say, no, he won't. He's not the guy. He's got to go. He wasn't an NFL caliber quarterback before. Now he is, in terms of should he be in the NFL, he has a place to sit in the NFL for sure. Should he be a starting quarterback for one of the 32 teams? If he is, your team's probably not, the expectations for your team's probably not that high. So Carson Wentz, how much does he raise the expectations? I'm not sure, but I think he does give you a little bit more. But that's not the question that I have for the Commanders, right? That's not the big question mark for that team. For me, it's about the defense. This defense was supposed to be top 3 last year. This is supposed to be one of the best defenses we've seen. All they've done is drafted defensive pieces. All they did was bring in a coach that knows defense. All they did is have all these pieces and the best defensive line, and they're going to have the best pass rush in the NFL, and they're going to have all these things going, and everything went wrong. Everything went wrong with that defense. It's not like they were the worst defense or anything, but they clearly missed the mark on where they wanted to be, and that's a big question mark for the Washington Commanders. Can that defense get back? Can that defense hit the expectations this season? Can they hit what we thought they were going to do last season? That's the biggest question mark for me. Carson Wentz is a guy that, listen, this is his last-ditch effort at being a starting quarterback for the NFL. If he comes in and stinks it up, if they have to put Heineke back in the game at some point, not because of injuries to Carson Wentz, it's a wrap. Carson Wentz will never start another game in the NFL. Unless someone gets hurt and he's a backup. But like getting a starting job, he'll never get that if he's not a solid, obvious improvement from Tyler Heineke. So with that being said, Washington Commanders 7-10 last year. I'm going to give them 8-9 this year. I think that Carson's just still not that guy. I do think this is going to be one of his last years being a starting quarterback in the NFL. I really do. It just hasn't worked out for Carson, unfortunately. I don't hate the guy. I really don't. Even him being with Philly, you'll notice, you stick around long enough, you'll see, especially when we get into the NFL season, I don't hate Philly. I don't hate Washington. I don't hate any of these teams. I will always be able to give credit where credit's due. I'll always be able to talk about them in a glowing way if they deserve it. I'll be critical if they deserve it as well, but I never hated Carson. I thought he was really good when he was in Philly. Obviously, when he was that MVP candidate, when he had that season that looked like holy crap. But ever since then, he just hasn't been the same, and it's been a pretty consistent regression for him since then. Seattle, I'm not going to talk too much about Seattle Seahawks. Losing somebody like Russell Wilson is a major loss. Drew Lock or Geno Smith, which one of them is going to be the guy? Either way, I just can't see that team doing better than they did last year. And last year they did not so hot, 7-10 last year. I'm going to give them 5-12 this season. I have Seattle Seahawks worse, obviously, not making the playoffs at 5-12. The Atlanta Falcons, same situation. Lose their starting quarterback. Marcus Mariota is looked at to be the starting quarterback. They did draft Desmond Ridder. Best case scenario for Atlanta is Desmond Ridder ends up being the starting quarterback at some point this season. Not because I think Marcus Mariota is terrible or he can't be a starting quarterback in this league, but it's a good sign if Ridder's better. That would be best case scenario if you're an Atlanta Falcons fan, is Ridder ends up being better and you go, oh shit, we might have a quarterback of the future. I don't think that happens, and I just don't see the pieces on the team to make them better than they were last year. I'm going to say 7-10 last year. I'm going to give them the under. 5-12, 4-13, right around that area. I think they're going to have a pretty high draft pick coming up this next draft, and that's not good if you're an Atlanta Falcons fan. Chicago Bears. What are the Chicago Bears going to look like this year? Justin Fields, second year in the league. His rookie year was, outside of Trevor Lawrence, this was a tough rookie year for Justin Fields. He had a real tough season, not made any better by Matt Nagy. Matt Eberflus is now the head coach. Luke Gessie, former quarterback, OC, assistant to the Green Bay Packers, spent some time, obviously, with Aaron Rodgers in that system. Matt Eberflus, former defensive coordinator turned head coach. What does he add from the offensive perspective? What does he do for Justin Fields, if anything? And if not, does he just leave that up to Coach Getsy, and how much what does he have? That's the big question mark. I haven't seen much to be sold on either of these guys. They could be gurus. They could come in and completely change it. I just don't. I look at the Chicago Bears and I just can't see it. Justin Fields, unfortunately, is with a team who's just has not made enough moves that seem like they're going to be able to help them. It's another one of those situations where I was talking about the New Orleans Saints, and even with Jameis Winston out, I think Justin Fields is better than Taysom Hill or whoever the Saints are going to have starting for them while Winston's out. I think Justin Fields is better than all of them, but yet I'm going to give the Bears a 16-11 record because if I put Justin Fields with the Saints, you know what I mean? Like, especially if Sean Payton had Justin Fields, if Sean Payton was still there, I don't know where that team would be. But the Bears just haven't done enough as an organization to put the talent around them. They don't have the roster around Justin Fields. Like, Justin Fields would have to take quantum leaps in his game. He would have to improve drastically in order for this team to get anywhere near sniffing the playoffs. So because of that, can't really give them more wins. It's hard for me to say that they'll win less than 6 games. I would hate to believe that Matt Nagy leaves and they get worse. I just don't want to believe that. Matt Nagy was so bad. He was terrible. Him and Laser were terrible. I just think they had the opportunity. I mean, they were supposed to be what Justin Fields needs, what a first-round draft pick quarterback needs to come into. 2 offensive guys, passing game coordinators, know how to move the ball up and down, and they just couldn't do it. So I would hate to imagine a world where they're worse without those guys, but I can't see this roster being much better. Therefore, I keep them at 6-11. I don't think that they're going to improve too much, but I hope that they don't regress. I hope that Justin Fields, at least from his standpoint, from just the individual Justin Fields, improves this year coming up. Just a few more teams. Carolina Panthers, big question for them. Who in the world is going to be their quarterback come week 1? They have Sam Darnold. They drafted Matt Corral. I am not sold on Matt Corral at all. Wasn't sold on him throughout college. Not sold on him now. Obviously he hasn't played a damn game, but I just wasn't sold on him. Obviously they got him where they got him. The big question for me is who's going to be your quarterback, Jimmy G or Baker Mayfield? Right? We've been seeing a whole lot early talks about Baker Mayfield, about him being a possible target for the Carolina Panthers. We heard rumors that the conversations were heating up and that maybe Baker would be there. And then as of recently, the hotter rumor is Jimmy G heading over to Carolina and that they're pretty close on a trade deal there. Don't know how we rock. Listen, I know I'm sticking to the teams that didn't make the playoffs, but it would be a great sign if you're a San Francisco fan. If San Francisco is perfectly fine trading Jimmy G, because that tells you that Trey Lance is ready to go, that they believe in him, and that they're confident that he's going to be the guy. If Jimmy G is if they're hanging on to Jimmy G for dear life, if they're like, yo, we have to get exactly the value that we think we should get for him, then it tells me that maybe Trey Lance still has a lot of improvements to make. But with that being said, it just depends. It just depends on who the quarterback is going to be. I do believe, unlike the Cleveland Browns situation, I do believe that they'll get one of them. I do believe that either Baker or Jimmy G will be a quarterback for the Carolina Panthers, and because of that reason, I'm going to give them the over. They were 5-12 last year. If I'm not mistaken, they started off 4-0, right? And then they had their first loss to the Cowboys, and then just one win the rest of their games throughout the season. Just died hard. 5-12. I'm going to say 8-9 this year for the Carolina Panthers. New York Giants, 4-13 last year. This is Daniel Jones' last hurrah. The Daniel Jones era in New York is ending, in my opinion. I don't think Daniel Jones will go further with this team after this season. Obviously, they declined his 5th-year option. Had the option to pick up his 5th year and keep him around for next year as well. They declined it. So this is going to be Daniel Jones' last year under contract with the Giants, and I can't see him improving to the point where they keep him around, especially with everything else around him. It's not a solid team. Draft picks, Thibodeau, Evan Neal, they've had some good draft picks. They have good pieces in place, but nothing that's going to help Daniel Jones immediately and save him from another bad season. I give him 1 game improvement, 4-13 last year. I'm going to say 5-12 this season. Not good enough. Personally, it lands them dead last again in the NFC East. And then goodbye to Daniel Jones. Look for them to draft somebody. Maybe they looked for a trade, something to go on. But just expectations for the Giants are low again. And then the worst team in the NFL last season, the worst team in the NFC last season was the Detroit Lions. Obviously, the signings of Aiden Hutchinson and Jamison Williams are huge. Two rookies who can be very impactful coming in, but again, they're rookies. How impactful are rookies really? Do they change cultures? Do they take teams non-playoffs to the playoffs? We don't know. How is Jared Goff going to do in his second year with Detroit? At his age, where he's at, he's already been in a Super Bowl. It's hard to imagine that Jared Goff improves. But, if he has a decent year, I can see the Detroit Lions giving you hope. That's what we're looking for the Detroit Lions this year is can you give the fans of Detroit, those poor fans, this is coming from a Cowboys fan, saying that another fan base, having pity for another fan base sounds laughable coming from a Cowboys fan. But the Detroit Lions fans, I cannot relate to how miserable it must be to be a Detroit Lions fan. Can you give them a bit of hope? It seems like for the last couple years, hope has gone out the window for all Detroit Lions fans. Can Dan Campbell, Jared Goff, and now these rookies that they're being added, can they give them a little bit of hope? Can they improve on a 3-13 season last year? I think they will. Give them the over. Not much, right? The bar was set extremely low, so it's not like I'm saying something crazy, saying that they'll get more than 3 wins this year. But I have them finishing 6-11. I do think that adds hope. I think it gives you a situation where you go, hey, maybe we're starting to cook something up. Maybe we're starting to find a formula here. And that is every single team. We got through it. Got through all teams that did not make the playoffs last year. Some of them I said will make it. For the NFC, how many teams did I say will make the playoffs that didn't last year? I said the Minnesota Vikings, 1. I have one team in the NFC making the playoffs this year that didn't last year. So all the other teams, what team, if you must know, what team will not make the playoffs that made the playoffs last year? If I had to pick one, maybe the Cardinals or the Cowboys. Those would be the 2 teams that I would look at that won't make the playoffs. I do really feel like the Eagles will win, but we'll get into all that later. We'll probably do that next season. Next season. We'll do that next week. Talk about those teams that did make the playoffs. Talk about the Super Bowl champions, the return of Tom Brady, the Dallas Cowboys, Philadelphia Eagles, who's winning the NFC East. Talk about the Pittsburgh Steelers. We'll talk about all the teams that made the playoffs, which ones will return, which ones won't, who's going to win a Super Bowl. We'll get into all of that stuff next week. So that wraps up episode 62. Thank you guys. As always, I will be back Friday to cover UFC 273, Israel Adesanya, Jared Cannonier. Butchered his name, Jared Cannonier, Israel Adesanya, obviously the 185-pound title. We got Alex Volkanovski, Max Holloway 3, Sugar Sean, the Sugar Shane O'Malley is back. Him and Pedro Munoz gets his top 10 opponent, and Pedro Munoz and the rest of the fight card's fucking nuts. This is one of the best pay-per-views of the year. Obviously, we expected it for International Fight Week. It's living up to the expectations. I hope the fights live up to the expectations. I think it's going to be insane. Deep dive into that pay-per-view. I'll talk all about that and then possible matchups, other things that are happening in the UFC and the boxing world. So that's coming up on Friday. I'll see you guys then. Peace.